Okay, in my last video, I showed off this 3D printed truing stand. And in there, I briefly went over the 4 different aspects of having your wheel truly trued. Rather than go into a long tirade in that video though about how this works, I decided to cut it out into its own video to make it easier to find the content that you want. Now, probably the most important part of this video is the demonstration on how to do your dish check without having a proper dish tool. So if that's what I want to see, look below and I will have a little index of the video and which part to skip to find that information. Now I'm going to try to do this all in like one take, just kind of wing it and see how it goes. So fingers crossed it'll work out well. Anyway, having your wheel true is very important because that affects the way your ride handles, right? If your wheel is not true and has a wobble to it, as you're riding, it's going to do that wobble and kind of make your bike snake along. More importantly, when you're braking, if you have your typical road bike, then you also have rim brakes. So they contact here on the surface of the wheel. If your wheel is not straight and in the center, your brakes are not going to contact it evenly, and it's going to make it wobble violently under heavy braking loads. So you already have a wheel that makes you not ride straight, and then when you brake hard, it makes you really not ride straight. That's no bueno, okay? So it is definitely worth putting in the time to true your wheels up, maybe once every couple months, or after you have a slip or something. Just whenever you feel it not performing up to snuff, pull it off, take the tire off, give it a quick check. Doesn't take that long once you get the hang of it. Anyway, the 4 components. Firstly, there's the side-to-side waver, which is commonly referred to as true. That's really only one part of it though. Okay, it's that check side to side. Next, there's the up and down hop, the measure of how oblong your wheel is. You don't want it oblong. There's the dish, like the curvature and kind of how much the side the wheel pulls. We want it dead in the middle. And lastly, there's a tension of the spokes, which has a defined range that you're supposed to work in. So, starting off with the waver. We check that using the rub indicator here on the side of the rim. If we look at this rim here, we will see that there basically is no waver. That's because these are my wheels and I take care of them, right? I've already had this truing stand. I already trued it up about a month ago. There's probably some irregularities in it now from hitting potholes and such, but honestly, it's probably pretty good. So if we're going to take a look at it here and bring this rub indicator in. So you see there, where it's not touching at all, we have maybe 20 thou in variance, which is well within the tolerance of what you're supposed to have. Maybe like 40 thou, roughly a millimeter is pretty good. But to be pedantic about it, we're going to draw this in a little bit more until we hear some rub. Just in one spot if possible. There we go. That's good enough. So we've highlighted 2 points on the wheel that are more this way than everything else. And we want to pull the wheel all into one plane. So here was one of those points. So if this part is more to the right and we want to bring the wheel into one plane, we have 2 options. Either we can bring this part to the left, or we can bring everything else to the right. Now, when you're working with a truing stand that only has a rub indicator on one side, I generally find it easier to always pull to the left. The important caveat is that every so often while you're truing, you want to take your wheel out and flip it around, okay? Because if you always only pull to the left and you don't turn your wheel around, over time, you're going to pull your wheel more and more to the left until it's no longer in the center, right? So by flipping it around every so often, they roughly cancel out and keep your wheel mostly in the middle. Otherwise you'd be introducing dish by accident, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. So here we see this spoke pulls to the left. And these two here beside it pull to the right. So to pull this bit of the rim to the left, the obvious thing to do is to tighten this spoke. Another option would be to actually loosen these two spokes, and that would make this one in relation slightly tighter. Now, which of those things you do really depends on the situation. For a long time, I would only ever tighten spokes as I was truing. So in this case here, I would tighten this to pull it more that way. If I were on this guy here instead and that was rubbing, I would tighten this one and this one beside it to pull it that way. That all worked fine and good, but when I eventually bought a tension meter and checked my spoke tension, I'd found that I'd actually cranked them all up to 60 to 100% over tensioned, which it's not the worst thing, but when I fixed it, it felt a lot better. So again, we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Just know that as things get more and more tight, you should also consider loosening some spokes up to see if that can get the same desired effect of just bringing it all in the plane. Okay? So here, I guess I will tighten this a little bit and we'll see if that P in Apollo still rubs after this. Now it's important to note that the nipples here actually are not righty tighty, lefty loosey. They are the opposite of that. Okay, lefty tighty, righty loosey. The reason for that is you can imagine your spoke as kind of a threaded rod, right? And this here is a nut that kind of sits in on the inside of the rim, has a flange that catches against it, and then comes against the threaded rod. So turning this left is effectively putting it up the threaded rod. Okay, that would be loosening it if you're tightening it down like this. If this were the nipple, then, turning it left this way is loosening it and drawing it up the threaded rod. So up the threaded rod actually shortens the effective length of the spoke from where it comes on the hub. So in this case, we want to tighten it. So you're going to turn it a quarter turn to the left. Just a little bit there. And now see, it doesn't rub. And in fact, that was enough of adjustment to pull out the other point that rubbed too, which was somewhere in the same general area. I heard there was a rub space rub, and then a long space after that. So that's another point to notice, is that all these spokes kind of affect each other, right? When it comes to tensioning or detensioning one spoke, you can also do the two beside it. And if you end up having like a spot like here and here that are both bad, then maybe just fixing, like this spoke here and this spoke here can actually affect the ones in the middle enough to bring it all in true. There's a little bit of an art to it. You'll learn it as you go along. But with careful adjustments here and there, we can eventually bring it all to being a straight line. Let's see. The next part to notice is the hop. So that's measuring how oblong your wheel is. Ideally, it's not oblong at all. So for that, we bring our rub indicator down here beneath the rim. Now some fancier truing stands actually have an L-shaped rub indicator that can contact like this side or this side, but mine's a bit more homebrew than that. Still does the job though. So let's see. Here we are. I get the Wheel of Fortune to spin. And take a look here, trying to not run my phone into the rim. And that looks pretty steady right there. Just a little bit of a gap. We budge this guy up, we can possibly hear the points where it contacts first. It's hitting in several spots. I want to pull it away so it's just barely hitting on one spot if possible. A little bit closer. Again, my wheels are already pretty true. So here we have 3 spots that are rubbing. dun, 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 right? So that means that those 3 points sit lower than the rest of the wheel. So to bring them up, we actually want to tighten. Let's see. So here's a rubbing spot. You want to tighten a pair of spokes that pull in opposite directions. So you see this one pulls to the right, this one pulls to the left. If we tighten them both, that should draw this part of the rim up while not pulling it to the side, one side, anymore, because we're canceling out the side-to-side forces by going on one spoke that pulls in each direction. So when checking for hop, it's generally much, much easier to pull the low points up than to pull the high points low. So that's a part where you're going to find yourself, usually tensioning more than you are loosening. But again, it is important to loosen every so often as well as tension. So if you're loosening, you really got to bring this guy down just a little bit and then look carefully for any point where there is a clear jump. So on a worse wheel, of course, on a worse wheel where it is very oblong, you'll typically see parts where there's obviously a jump up of the rim away from the rub indicator. And that's where you'd stop it and come back and then do this whole thing back and forth a few times. And you're like, oh, that's the spot right there. And then where it's pulled up high, you'd find a pair of spokes that pull opposite directions, just like these, and you would loosen them both by a little bit, allowing the rim to draw itself back down. Now, as we're doing this, checking for waver, checking for hop, it's also important to de-stress your spokes. That's going along and giving these each a squeeze. So that one was silent, this one's silent, and that one made a little pop. And that one also made a little pop. What that pop is the nipple here seating itself onto the rim. And so I said that nipple has a little flange that sits up against the interior of this rim. Now, as you go and you adjust these spokes, that nipple doesn't really sit perfectly in the hole. So by giving it a squeeze, you can kind of shift it to make sure it's sitting at the very bottom of the hole. That's important because that has an impact on the effective length of your spokes. So if you don't de-stress it and they're kind of like cockeyed in the hole, the first time you ride your bike and put the weight of yourself on it, that's going to stress the wheel and make all the spokes change in their effective length just by a hair. And then that will pull your wheel slightly out of true. It's not the biggest deal, it's a minor impact at most, but as long as you're putting the effort in to true your wheel, you may as well go along, these all squeeze. Kind of in alternating pairs. There, and the opposite sides where they cross over. The next thing we want to check is dish, okay? So that is how far to the side the wheel's pulled in relation to the contact faces. Ideally, it's not pulled to the side at all, okay? So the important thing is the distance of the rim from this face here and this face here. It's not the difference between the actual hubs where the spokes are. That's important because here on a front wheel that's symmetric, it looks the same, right? The distance between these two is the same as the distance between those two, right? But on a rear wheel, it's not the same. So back here on the rear wheel, we can see the spokes, stick out a lot more in the direction on this side than they do on this side. This is much more straight. That one pulls out. The reason for that is because on this side here, we have to accommodate for the cassette. So these spokes pull at a much more downward angle, and these ones pull at a much more sideways angle. So we're actually going to end up tightening these spokes to a higher tension so that they pull, kind of less efficiently to the right. But we got to remember that as we're going along and truing this wheel. These spokes here require a bit more of a turn to pull the wheel that way than these ones will to pull the wheel that way. So there are two ways to check for dish. One is to get a official, park tool, dishing tool, whatever, right? And that rests on 2 points of the rim opposite each other and then measures the distance to the hub contact surface. That is a plenty good tool, but it's also a very limited tool. just the one thing, right? And I kind of don't like buying big tools that are only single purpose, you know, unless it's like a drill press, which is one like, you know, big purpose, right? But just a dishing tool, you can get by without it, right? And my method for getting by without it is firstly, get roughly accurate in your truing stand by just turning the wheel around and every so often, you know, making sure it sits roughly the same distance from this rub indicator while you're correcting for waver. If you're rotating the wheel, you know, every so often while you're doing that waver correction, your wheel should stay pretty true. You know, because if I had it pulled all the way to the left, the next time I pulled the wheel out and swapped it around, I would find it's just like immediately, you know, way further over the rub indicator than it was in the other direction. And I would know I had to correct that. The other thing you can do is to actually take the skewer out of the wheel and put it over a flat surface where you support it at 2 points and then measure the distance to the surface, the same way you would with the Park Tool dishing tool. Now I'm going to pull this wheel out. I can't do that with one hand of the camera and all, so give me a second. Okay, so here is the wheel, skewer removed, and I bring it over here to the dining room table where I have 2 jars and a set of playing cards. And I have that set up. So if you come in here and you check that, oh, look at that. That's the perfect height right there already. What a surprise, right? The exact right height of stack of cards. This one slides just fine. I put one more in here. That ain't gonna fit. So now we have a measurement of how high this is, you know, this surface is from the table on these 2 points of the rim. Now, given that we've already trued this rim and it's all in one plane, we can actually flip it over, and it doesn't matter what 2 points in the rim you contact as long as they're apart from each other, right, across the diameter. Ideally, flip it and actually rest it on the same, you know, right here and here. But if you do end up turning it, as I do this one-handed, I'm not gonna get it perfect again. It should still be okay because we know that this wheel is already sitting in one plane. Now I come back down here again, and we can see there is a little gap. So we draw out some cards. That one fits. An energy card. That one fits. Another energy. And that one does not fit. So now we know the rim is pulled 2 Pokemons further in this direction. So we want to pull it all down by 1 Pokemon in this direction, right? Pulling it down by 1 effectively splits the difference and gets it back in center. Now, again, this is 2 card thicknesses off, right? That is not very much at all. I would not generally bother actually checking this. I'm just trying to demonstrate how you would do this on your own, right? That is close enough for all intents and purposes. But say I were off by, you know, 15 cards, or using a stack of dimes instead, and it was off by like 2 dimes, right? 2 dimes is pretty significant. That I want to correct. So if the wheel is all pulled up this direction, you correct that by addressing all the spokes that pull in this direction and tighten them by a little bit. Alternatively, you can loosen all the spokes on the top. Wait a second. I might have that backwards. Let's think. We have the hub a little bit higher than the rim. We want to draw it down. Ah, I had it backwards. Look at that. Okay. So here we have the hub a little bit upwards, right? So we want to draw the hub down. Think about it in relation to this guy in the middle here. We want to draw it down by just a little bit, meaning we actually tighten these ones all on the top by a quarter turn, or loosen them all on the bottom by a quarter turn. Once again, just going by, you know, how much have you tightened all these spokes already? You know, whether you want to loosen or tighten. But that's what you want to do, and effectively pull this hub down by a little bit in this case. If you had the other situation, you want to pull the hub up, right? use some common sense. Now, since we've already got it all in a plane and got it in a circle, then any adjustments you do to one side on every spoke should keep those all both, correct, right? You shouldn't be changing the waver of the wheel at all or the roundness by doing every spoke on one side. That's a theory anyway. In practice, it usually doesn't work that perfectly, but it's pretty close. So you go through the whole process one more time, spending like 2 minutes up there checking the waver, a minute checking the hop, and then coming back to here and finding that, okay, now it's all good. So last thing to check is the tension. Whoa, nearly lost my audio there. Whoop, there it goes. But we are still recording. Good. All right, barreling on. So, last thing is the tension of the spokes. Now for that you need a fancy dancy tool. This is the Park Tool tension meter. And while it is like $70, and it's a single purpose tool, if you're gonna be really pedantic and really wanna get your wheels like absolutely perfect, you do need one of these. And the Park Tool one is nice because it comes with a very accurate calibration chart. They've already put a good amount of work into this. And if you buy the knockoff ones, they don't come with this. So this is one case where I would definitely recommend forking over the money for the nicer Park Tool. Plus those guys do a lot of really good videos on maintenance and stuff anyway. So, I do like buying some stuff occasionally from them just to support their channel and their company because they do amazing work. The Park Tool videos and also RJ the Bike Guy are my two favorite for maintenance. I know I just stuck that little bit in the middle of like a 20-something minute video, but I'll mention them again in the comments down below because, yeah, both of them immensely helpful as you're getting along. Starting off as like, do-it-yourself bike mechanic. Anyway, you check the tension by using this guy and pinching, going to roughly the middle of the spoke and releasing. And then you see where this thing contacts here on this gauge. Let's see if I can get that, yeah. And it's numbered out with kind of dimensionless numbers. Those numbers don't directly correspond to any measurement, but if you refer to the handy dandy chart, they tell you for your diameter and your material type. So here I have stainless steel spokes, so using the steel round tables. I think they're 1.6s. No, not 1.6s. They're 2.0s. The middle of the range was 105 kilogram force. Yeah. So here they have roughly the recommendation of where your tension is supposed to be, and you want to keep as close to the middle as possible. Again, these all come in a range, so it's not super crucial that you're directly in the middle. And in fact, you're not going to be when it comes to rear wheels, right? One of them will be tightened more than the other, just because that's the way the geometry works. But you want to keep it as much in the middle as possible. And the reason for that is, if you tighten them far too much, or loosen them far too much, your ride is going to be really soft or really hard. A soft wheel or a hard wheel will just be more prone to getting out of true. So, like I mentioned before, I had accidentally gotten my wheels to be like 60 to 100% over-tensioned, and they were hard as a rock. So when I finally learned this, I was like, oh crap, right? When I bought the tension meter and checked them all, I'm like, whoa, this is way too high. I just went through and I unloosened every spoke, basically, like not all the way, but most of the way, to like beneath the lowest number here in the gauge. And then I tightened it all up again from scratch and retread the wheel that way. Took a long time, but when I rode it again, it was a dream. Like, wait a second, my wheel is not supposed to be rock hard and like just vibrating on every bump and getting out of true every time I hit a little hole. Like, it was so much better. And when they're properly tensioned, just the wheel has more give. And as you hit potholes and things, it'll spring and can absorb some of that and then spring back the right way. If it's too tight, it's not gonna do that. It's gonna spring and sprawling and, get out of true again. Or if it's too loose, it'll be just wobbly and do the same thing. So if you can afford the extra money and you want to really do it the right way, it is nice to have one of these tension meters. The only comment I'd have on this guy is that the numbers here were originally not very easy to see. You see right now they're all like white and clear and easy to read. That's because I came by with some white paint and rubbed it in there and then wiped off the excess on the top. And that gives you a really clear indicator of what number you're on. Without that, it was really impossible to read. So take 5 minutes, make that change, and make your tool a bit easier to work with. Now, I think, let's see. I guess you have to adjust your tension. I'll talk about that briefly. Again, it's a matter of going through and getting every spoke this time. And just by like a hair, right? If every spoke is tight, you want to make them all loosened by an equal amount. And that way you can keep all the other relative positions the same while dropping the tension on every spoke if they're all over tightened. If you find that like one specific spoke is tightened, like this one here, then you might want to come back and loosen that one a bit and then tighten the ones beside it to help make up for the same adjustment in the waver. Really, once you get that far, again, it becomes kind of an art. But if you can do it, man, does it feel good. So, yeah, I think that's everything. So if you'll excuse me, I have a bike to ride. I swear, everywhere I go, I have this song stuck in my head. Everywhere I ride.